Hello, I'm here to talk to you today about anxiety and anxiety disorders generally. I think the first thing I want to say about this is anxiety is not a bad thing. There's a really interesting sort of question is like, if you didn't have anxiety in your life, would you move? Anxiety provides some positive things for us in terms of moving us along around some stuff. Yeah, this is not true, but if you discovered this morning that the research paper for this class was required be in next Monday, you might suddenly feel some sense of anxiety about that. And what that anxiety would do would be to motivate you to do the work to get it done. In and of itself, anxiety is not a bad thing. However, this is almost place again where the issues about frequency, intensity, and duration come into the process. If your frequency, if you're always anxious, that's a problem. That becomes an issue for us, for a person. Intensity, if your anxiety level is here and suddenly it's up here, which is called a panic attack, that's a problem. Duration, if these things go on for extended periods of time, that's a problem. Um, Another thing about anxiety where it comes up is where you have anxiety related to a specific thing. Try to see if I have something around here I could come up with that. I happen to have a little fan here made of turkey feathers. If birds give you anxiety, that can be a problem. Particularly during the summer in Vermont. Supposedly this is the time we have birds in Vermont. Uh, with anxiety, if peanut butter, the idea of peanut butter causes you anxiety, that can be that's a phobia. My mother, when I was growing up, had a phobia about snakes. One day I brought home not a real snake, a snake that I bought in a 5 and 10 store as a kid. And it was little segmented things in it. So it didn't really look a lot like a snake, but it would move like a snake, that sort of slither thing. My mother saw me with it outside and locked the door and would not let me in the house until she saw me through the window, put it in the garbage can outside. That's a phobia. About the nature of why she has that phobia, I have no idea. But it's anxiety about a specific thing, and that can be a problem for people. So anxiety this is a place again when we're talking about anxiety. I really want to encourage you to think about frequency, intensity, and duration, because that's how you differentiate among the various kinds of anxiety disorders. I want to talk a little bit about where does anxiety come from? What is anxiety? Anxiety, to some extent, is a level of agitation that we experience, and that's what causes it. That's when we start thinking about anxiety. I want to just mention here the brain, because a lot of brain stuff, the anxiety is very caught up in brain stuff. And there is some research, more recent research about anxiety says there's two different major kinds of anxiety. Some anxiety is anxiety about when you think about something, and the more you think about it, the worse it gets. That's anxiety that happens up here in the cerebral cortex. That one starts thinking about an issue. When you start thinking about, as you're driving away from home, it's like, oh my God, did I leave the stove on? I don't think so, but maybe I did. And it's anxiety that's going on here in the brain, up in the cerebral cortex of the brain. That's one kind of anxiety. A second kind comes out of the amygdala, and there's a little piece down here in the brain. It's a little tiny thing in the brain. And the amygdala's function in our body it's the sign that sends warning signs. When the amygdala gets stimulated, what it does is it shoots a spurt of chemicals into your body, which cranks up your body very quickly. Literally, it's like I come back to the snake thing. I don't think of myself as having a phobia about snakes. But if I'm walking out in my yard and suddenly what happens is right near my feet, something's suddenly wiggling quite quickly through the grass in front of me, my tendency is to go straight up into the air and going, oh my God. And I can realize, oh, it's a little garden snake. You know, it's not dangerous, not a big issue. And what's happened here is first my amygdala has been stimulated, and it shoots this shot of adrenaline in my body, which says danger. And then what happens is, quickly, my cerebral cortex goes into catches things and says, "Oh yeah, but that's not a big danger. You know, it's not. You know, it's a garden snake, and it's all of 6 inches long. It's not going to kill you, Steve." So my cerebral cortex takes over. There's some evidence that says those are two different kinds of anxieties. And it's important to understand sort of which, if one experiences anxiety, which one is it? Because we can learn, our amygdala can learn about danger. It can learn to recognize things as dangerous to us and send messages out to our body that says, there is big danger here. There's a second way that tends to be that goes from our senses. We see things, we think about things, and it gets the cortex cranking up here. When we get thinking about our thinking goes on differently in the process, which may then stimulate the amygdala. Some stuff goes from, say, our eyes and ears directly to the amygdala. Some stuff goes from our eyes to ears to our cortex, and from there to the amygdala. That becomes important, because what it does is those are different kinds, and what meets the point of that is they're treated differently. You tend to go at them somewhat differently. If it's primarily cerebral cortex anxiety, you gotta learn how to change your thinking around some, because that's what it is. It's a thinking process. If it's amygdala, which is down further in the brain, closer to the brain stem, learn to think about it differently. It's just not going to do it by itself. What you need to do is sort of retrain your amygdala to say, no, this is not anxiety. This is not something to be afraid of. My brain, my cerebral cortex can be in charge here, because this part of my brain is not functioning as well. The part down here closer to my brain stem. How do you do that? Actually, with things like mindfulness and meditation, deep breathing, you learn relaxation techniques. You get some exposure to the things that cause anxiety. And you breathe. And you physically relax yourself, even though your amygdala is saying, and you gotta go and breathe, relax, calm yourself. And you can do that over some extended period of time and actually reprogram your brain so that you may still get the kind of quick, oh, no, wait a minute, that's not one of those things. And you can learn to do that. That's a different process than if, oh my God, did I leave the stove on? Oh, I don't know, may have left the stove. I should probably go back and check the stove one more time, because sometimes it comes on. And that's stuff that's going on much more in the cerebral cortex, and you need to process that differently. And lead to ways of thinking about it. Cognitive behavioral therapy tends to be really good for stuff that's going on, anxiety that's going on in your cerebral cortex. It does not tend to be nearly as good for anxiety going on in your amygdala. Different sorts of approaches, different sorts of tools here for the different kinds of anxiety as we're dealing with it. That's what I want to tell you about anxiety. Those are the crucial things for me to really think about here in the process. I would note for you also, part of the cognitive behavioral process is not too unlike some of the other pieces of it. I mentioned several decades ago now, I was in a psychodrama training program, and it was a really interesting program. And I walked in early one day, and the guy who's in charge of the program, Jim Ennis, sits down next to me and says, "So, Steve, how you doing today?" And I said, "I don't know. I'm kind of anxious about what's going to happen today." And he goes, "Really? Tell me about that. Where in your body are you experiencing that anxiety, Steve?" Now, this is a new idea to me. It's like, I experience anxiety someplace in my body, which is, by the way, it's a sensation first, and then you have some cerebral things you do about it. So I had to go back and say, okay, well, I'm feeling some tension in my shoulders and a little tension in my stomach. I'm a little acidic in my stomach, and I'm kind of jittery. And that's what I'm experiencing. And that's what when I say anxiety, that's what I'm experiencing. And Jim and I sat back and looked at me and said, it's interesting. I'm experiencing almost the exact same sensations, he said. When I think about it, what I say is, I'm really excited about what can happen today. And I sat back and went, huh? Because two things happened. One is I felt like, wow, one can experience the same thing and call it different things, and that has a different effect on oneself. That, by the way, is a real foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy. The second thing that happened to me is that's the smoothest intervention anyone's ever done with me. That was really smooth. And I was really impressed with Jim Ennis in the process and thought, I hope someday to be that smooth as a therapist. But it's a way of reprogramming or reconceptualizing how we view the world and how we experience the world. You get this sort of learning to be in touch with the sensations in our bodies and changing then how we think about those sensations. What's the language we want to use differently for what we tell ourselves about what we are experiencing? That's to some extent the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy. And it's a big piece of, particularly with anxiety, it's a crucial piece of the process. Many rant here about anti-anxiety drugs. What anti-anxiety drugs tend to do is they tend to relax some of the anxiety. They tend to reduce some of the agitation that's going on internally. Not a bad thing. You know, it's in fact, in many ways, it's a great thing to have that happen, except it doesn't tend to work as well over time. Over time, one tends to need increasing amounts of anti-anxiety drugs to get the same level of relief from your anxiety. So you have to use more and more, you have to keep upping the dosage on things on it. Ultimately, managing one's anxiety is a self-regulatory process. One has to teach oneself how to regulate your body and your reaction, your emotion, your reactions to things around you. It isn't that you would stop feeling anxiety. If you were really good at it, it isn't like you'll never feel anxiety again. What happens instead is you learn to regulate your anxiety, or regulate your emotional, how you react to the stimuli. What happens is the frequency of anxiety reduces, the intensity of it reduces, and the duration of anxiety reduces. I say, I walk out in the yard this morning, and if I walk up, or if I'm walking across the yard, there's this going through the yard, and it's a snake. I'm going to immediately kind of still. It's still going to happen. The thing is, within probably 30 seconds, I'm going, okay, it's just a snake. The intensity, it's like I didn't freak out and run screaming into the house. I jumped, no question about it. But I didn't run screaming into the house, or call the police or something like that, or the animal control to come out and get the snake. I had a reaction. 30 seconds, short duration. Intensity's down, duration's up. And frankly, if I start seeing snakes more often around here, it's gonna, because this happened to me at a later point in my life. I didn't like insects and didn't like them crawling on me. What can I say? But I was doing some yard work for an extended period of time for people over at one point. And when I first started doing the yard work, which I was laying under bushes and cutting bushes and so forth, I would see something just like, oh my God, I got something that's crawling on me. And after about the eighth or ninth bush, what I found myself to was laid under a bush and kind of going, wow, look at that guy. Isn't he an interesting one? I haven't seen one like that crawl on me before. Because it's like what happens is you get accustomed to something, and you, instead of having an emotional reaction, it's like, wow, that's an interesting one. It's a cognitive reaction as opposed to an emotional reaction. That can be learned, but it needs intention, it needs some practice, and it needs some reflection about how's that working and is what I'm doing working or not working. And that's a crucial piece of the kind of change process. My quick introduction to anxiety this morning.